The first time Leona stepped onto the training field, she felt every stare dig into her skin like small sharp stones thrown by people who had already made up their minds. Her frame was smaller, her voice quieter, her eyes not filled with defiance, but with something else, something the others mistook for fear. They called her names behind her back, sometimes to her face, weakling mouse glass bones. The instructors said little, just watched, letting the pressure sort out the strong from the rest. And day by day Leona kept moving, never fast enough, never loud enough, but always there, always present. She ran when they ran, fell when they fell, got back up every time. She said nothing when they mocked her silence, when they laughed at her inability to lift the same weight or march with the same thunder in her boots. Her bunkmate, a loud girl from Texas named Rena, once whispered, "You better start showing fire or they're going to eat you alive." Leona said nothing, just stared at the ceiling, thinking about the promise she made to her grandmother, the one she carried in the shape of a faded tattoo hidden under the sleeve of her uniform. Her skin bore the mark of something no one there knew about, a symbol passed down through generations, its meaning lost to most, but not to her and not to her family back home, where silence meant resilience, where strength was never shouted, it was endured. One morning during a particularly grueling obstacle course, Leona hesitated at the rope climb. Others passed. Her smirking one even muttered, "Just give up already," but she climbed anyway, slower than the rest, hands burning, arms trembling, until she reached the top and froze. The instructor below barked at her move, "Recruit, get down or fall." She did neither. She looked out across the field, and something in her face shifted, something quiet and deep that no one saw until later, when during inspection she removed her top layer and rolled up her sleeve, revealing the tattoo etched into her shoulder, a strange curved mark shaped like a flame and a feather intertwined. The commander, walking past, stopped mid-step, stared at the mark. His expression changed from stern to something almost hollow, as if he had seen a ghost. He asked her, "Where did you get that?" Leona met his eyes. "My grandmother wore it before me, her mother before her." The commander nodded slowly, then turned to the rest of the unit and said nothing more, but his silence spread like fire through the camp, because those who knew what the mark meant understood. It was the symbol of an elite unit from a war that had gone classified, a legacy buried in ash and secrecy, and now it was walking among them again, not loud, not fast, not angry, but steady like stone. And suddenly the girl they had mocked was no longer invisible. She was a reminder of something they all forgot to respect. Mood shifted after that inspection, not all at once, but like wind turning slowly before a storm. Rena was the first to ask about it late at night, her voice low, as if speaking to loud might summon something. She said, "Your grandma was in the unit, right? The one that disappeared?" Leona nodded without looking up from her notebook. "The one she wrote in every night, with pages filled not with stories, but codes and instructions her grandmother had taught her since she was 8 years old." Rena did not ask more after that, and soon others stopped laughing. When Leona ran behind them, they started watching her, noticing how she moved like someone who counted steps, how she never lost rhythm, how she never complained. One instructor, a veteran named Sergeant Vale, began to linger longer near her station, his eyes narrow and calculating, as if trying to place her face into a memory he could not name. During the hand-to-hand combat drills, Leona still struggled, but she never hesitated. She took hits, she stood back up, she adjusted quickly, she studied every opponent as if their movements were puzzles, and she only needed time to solve them. One evening, while the unit cleaned gear under floodlights, Sergeant Vale called her to the side. He said, "My brother served with a woman who wore that mark. Told me once it meant she saved his life 3 times before vanishing like smoke." He said they were ghosts, but real ones. Leona listened quietly, unsure what to say. Vale just nodded and said, "If you're anything like her, then you don't need to prove anything to anyone. You just need to remember who you are." After that, her drills changed. The instructors pushed her harder, longer, made her redo exercises alone in the cold rain, while others rested, not as punishment, but as preparation. And still she said nothing. Still she endured, her body aching, but her mind sharpening like a blade under fire. Word began spreading, not just in her unit, but beyond. Whispers from the older ranks, from those who recognized the mark from long ago. One evening, a high-ranking officer visited their training site, walked straight up to her, and stared at the Tadui said, your grandmother ever tell you what it means in full? Leona said, she told me it meant light without sound. The officer nodded and said it also means the one who strikes when none are watching. Keep that in mind, they're watching now. And not all of them are on your side. That night Leona sat under the stars, her notebook open, but blank for the first time since arrival. She looked at her hands bruised and shaking from drills and remembered her grandmother whispering stories of survival, of coded messages, of missions that never made the news, and deaths that were never honored in daylight. She never wanted to carry this legacy, not really, but now that it had surfaced in ink and silence, she knew she had no choice. She would carry it. She would finish what her grandmother started. The days grew longer and the drills more punishing, as if the ground itself wanted to break her, but Leona never faltered. Her body throbbed with pain and exhaustion, yet something deeper kept her upright, something older than orders, older than fear. Each morning she rose before the others, ran further, and stayed later, not out of pride, but necessity. She had begun to notice things, patterns, movements, shifts in the instructor's behavior that others missed. She began keeping track in her notebook, recording names, dates, unusual timing of drills and rotations. There were strangers in the camp, men who wore no insignia, who did not speak, but observed her every move. One stood near the mess hall for 3 days straight, never eating, never talking, just watching. Rena noticed too and said, maybe your Tata woke up ghosts. Leona gave her a quiet nod and said maybe some ghosts were never sleeping during a weekend break. She was called to the command tent, a space she had never entered before, where 3 officers stood. None of them introduced themselves. One slid a photograph across the table, a black and white image of a woman in uniform, her face marked with soot and eyes like Leona's. Do you know who this is? They asked. Leona said, yes, my grandmother. The officer asked, do you know what she did? Leona replied, only what she let me remember. They stared at her in silence. Then the oldest leaned forward and said, your grandmother saved 12 operatives on a mission we never speak of and vanished before the extraction team arrived. She was never officially listed, never officially buried, and the mark you carry was last seen on her jacket. She taught you things we believe. Some of those things might be buried in your training, in your muscle memory, in your instincts. Leona said nothing, not because she was afraid, but because she knew they wanted more than her answers. They wanted confirmation of something bigger, something hidden inside her. She was dismissed with no further instruction, but that night her cot had been moved to a private corner of the barracks, away from the others, as if isolation could silence the legacy inside her. Rena did not speak when they passed in the hallway. She only gave her a look of respect and distance, like one would give to someone already walking into fire. Leona trained alone now, her tasks harder, her observers closer. The man from the mess hall now followed her opally, never addressing her, never looking away. She tested him once, took an unexpected route through the supply shed and back through the motor pool. He stayed with her, never missing a beat. She began to understand that she was being measured not for failure but for readiness. She remembered a line her grandmother once said, the real test comes when you know they want you to succeed, but for reasons that would destroy you. Leona did not sleep that night. She wrote nothing. She only stared at the ceiling and waited for the next door to open. The door opened at 04:00 without a knock, without warning. Two men in black stepped inside her barracks corner and gestured silently. Leona rose without speaking. She had been dressed already, waiting. They led her past buildings, past fences, into a vehicle with no markings. It moved fast through winding roads, away from the base into the mountains, where fog wrapped the trees like a veil of secrets. They arrived at a compound made of steel and silence. No guards in sight, no lights, just a heavy door that opened with a code she did not see inside. The air was colder, the hall narrow and dim. They walked without speaking until she was led to a chamber where a single man stood in front of a wall filled with monitors and maps. His face was lined with age and knowledge, and he looked at her with eyes that had seen too many truths. He said, your grandmother once stood in this room. She left behind more than memories. We believe you are the last conduit. Leona listened as he explained the mission, a buried operation resurrected by threats. No one would confirm the unit that once bore her mark was being reformed, but not as soldiers, as shadows. She was told she had been chosen, not recruited, because her body had responded to training. Exactly like her grandmother's, her reactions, her timing, her ability to read patterns, all of it matched. She was shown files with redacted lines and blurred images, names erased, missions listed only by code. She asked one question, why me? The man answered, because your name was never supposed to appear in our system, and yet here you are like she was before you. Leona agreed with a nod. No further hesitation. Her notebook was taken and replaced with encrypted tablets. Her uniform switched to one with no badge, no number. Her training resumed underground in silence. She was taught to unlearn every command, every rule, every structure built for normal soldiers and replace it with instinct, with memory, with silence. She sparred daily with people who moved like shadows, people who never spoke, their eyes filled with stories they would never tell. She failed often, but learned faster. Her body hardened, her mind focused. She began dreaming of fire and fog, of a woman running through ruins and waking with the smell of metal in her lungs. The instructors tested her limits, blindfolded drills, underwater grapples, navigation through pitch-black tunnels. She passed, not perfectly, but precisely. The man returned after a month and said, we have a trial for you. Nothing in simulation, nothing in safety. We will drop you into a scenario and watch what happens. No guidance, no extraction. Do not seek contact. Do not expect rescue. Your job is to disappear and return. Leona nodded and packed nothing extra. Just what was given. Her tattoo now visible without shame, without question. It no longer felt like ink, it felt like armor. As the helicopter rose into the cold sky, she looked down at the world and knew she was no longer a recruit. She was becoming. The Latticide drop zone was a valley surrounded by jagged cliffs with no clear exits and no visible threat. Leona hit the ground hard, rolled twice, and stayed low, waiting, listening. The wind carried no voices, no movement, only the low hum of distant machinery. She moved through the terrain, careful not to leave a trail, recalling everything she had been taught, every whisper of her grandmother, every page she had memorized from the notebook now gone. She found an abandoned structure half buried in earth and shadow. It looked like it had not been touched in decades, but she noticed the dust was disturbed. Someone had been here recently. She entered with caution, hand steady, heart still, eyes sharp. Inside were remnants of old tech, broken furniture, and a single active light panel blinking slow and steady like a heartbeat. Leona approached and saw a phrase glowing on the surface, welcome back. Fire silent. She touched the panel and the screen shifted, showing a grainy video of her grandmother. In uniform, eyes fierce, voice calm, saying, if you are seeing this, then you have survived the first test and you're close to truth. This place holds fragments of a past we buried to protect the future, but now the future needs those fragments. You must decide what to carry and what to destroy. Behind the panel was a compartment, inside it a device that pulsed with blue light and a note in her grandmother's handwriting. Burn if compromised. Leona took it and moved fast. Night fell like a curtain, and she knew she had only hours before others arrived, not to help but to intercept. She laid false trails, doubled back erased prints. She found a stream and followed it until she reached a ridge overlooking a road and waited. Before dawn she saw them for figures in unmarked gear, moving with practiced silence. They moved toward the bunker just as the device in her hand began to blink faster. She knew they had triggered something. She knew she had minutes, maybe less. She ran not away, but to higher ground, placed the device in a hollow tree and set the charge as her grandmother had taught her, using no timer, only heat from her hand as the signal. She was nearly clear of the blast radius when it erupted, a bloom of blue and white swallowing sound and sight. The trees shook, birds scattered, and silence returned. She stayed still, breathing through the dirt, face streaked with ash. When she moved again, she headed east, climbing through rocks until she reached a small tower disguised as weather equipment. Inside a transmitter behind a false panel, she activated the signal, the one her grandmother had spoken of, the one no one used anymore, and said one word, Ember. Then she destroyed it and left before the sun fully rose, her clothes torn, her limbs aching but her eyes alive. She had not just passed the trial, she had awakened the network, the old one, the hidden one, the one built on sacrifice and silence, and she knew now more would come, not all friendly, but all importante. Days after The trial blurred together Leona moved like a ghost between safe houses and forgotten places, her body aching, her mind sharp as ever. Each contact she met knew her only as Ember, a name whispered in shadows. She carried the device her grandmother had entrusted her with, but more than that, she carried the weight of the legacy, a burden heavier than any drill or insult. The world outside seemed distant, disconnected, but inside her the past and present collided like storms colliding on the horizon. Her grandmother's stories became her guide, each lesson hidden in every word and every silence. The people who had once mocked her no longer mattered. Now they were background noise fading into the distance as Leona embraced what she had feared. Her tattoo was not just ink, it was a promise, a history, and a future intertwined. She sent coded messages through encrypted channels, signals. Others in the network responded silently, reassuring her she was not alone, yet the threats were real. The enemies many and unseen. She learned to trust her instincts, to read the spaces between words, to move without being seen. One night she stood on a rooftop, watching the city below, lights flickering like fireflies. Her phone buzzed, a message appeared. Coordinates, a time, a warning. She packed her things and disappeared into the night. She found herself at an abandoned dock where a small boat waited, its engine quiet. She climbed aboard and set off across the water, the wind cold, the waves steady. And beneath the stars she felt the legacy coursing through her veins, stronger than fear, stronger than doubt. When dawn broke, she reached the shore, a place where the next chapter would begin, a place where she would meet others who bore marks like hers and carry stories that could change the course of things. She was no longer the weak girl whispered about at boot camp. She was Ember, the last spark of a flame that refused to die, and as the sun rose, she stepped forward, ready to face whatever came next, because this was only the beginning of her story. The legacy was hers now, and she would protect it at all costs.